Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order, Township of Wainfleet Special Council meeting of October 19th. And are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Okay, I see none. A value engineering meeting, independent of the fire station project building committee, was held between Raimondo and Associates, Architects Incorporated, with Councillor Van Vliet and Councillor McClellan in attendance. And we're now going to ask for Councillor McClellan and Councillor Van Vliet to provide a summary of that value engineering report, and we'll have discussion on that. So you can, Raimondo is available. Mr. Raimondo?
Mr. Mayor, yes, we're here. Myself and Mr. Robbins are available.
Okay, thank you. So my understanding is, and we have before us a document with 20 points on it, and so I would ask the subcommittee, the evaluation committee, to go through, explain to the council and to the general public through each of those 20 points there, and we'll have discussion on them. We'll go point by point and see where it takes us.
Excellent.
Okay, Councillor, and just go through the mayor. We'll keep it organized and go ahead.
Oh, through you, Mr. Mayor. Point number 1 wasn't part of the evaluation. Was it? Wasn't that part of a meeting we had on September 22nd?
Okay, yeah, that was dealt with, yes.
Okay, so that should be removed.
Okay. Item 2.
What is that? I can keep going. Okay, so item number 2 does make sense. That's to keep the contingency. Say like under wraps.
I can't hear you into your mic. Sure.
Oh, sorry. To keep the contingency amount not out there. I think it's already out there in case the contingency amount changes. So that's the point there.
If you like, Councillor Van Vliet, I could certainly maybe walk through this a little quicker if you feel that if you feel you need the assistance. Let me know. It's Emilio here.
By all means, please do.
Okay, so just we'll go to item 2, bid allowances. So members of council, Mr. Mayor, city staff, there's a question related to how the contingencies are to be orchestrated. So like in any project, we carry a contingency of value that is comprised of a number of items, and one of them being a design contingency or a contingency allowance for any unforeseen conditions that may arise, any additional expenditures. So what we've done, and it's it's a good point from Councillor McClellan, is we removed that from the tender documents. There is the intent of still carrying a contingency, but it will be carried internally in the total project budget and administrated through city staff and the consulting team. So what that means is we've removed and reduced that contingency component in the contract documents. However, it does still remain in the total project cost. So that's reflected as a 0 credit or a 0 addition, because in essence, that value is still there. Number 3 or number 4, civil and site works. There was some concern about the oil grid interceptor, and if there were to have a overflow, that there be some mechanisms to disclose that there could be contamination discharging. So it was a relatively very good suggestion by Councillor McClellan, is that we would provide a concrete spill pad at the point of discharge to grade from the apparatus bay to the floor drains to the grid oil interceptor. So that would be an additional cost of approximately $6,000 to add that component. Number 5.
Excuse me. Mr. Raimondo, I would like to take opportunity at each one of these for the council to ask questions if they're interested. So on that one, the concrete slab, just, is there any questions to Mr. Ramondo on that? Oh, Councillor McClellan?
So maybe I can explain this.
Yep, Councillor.
So people never check these. They're buried in the ground. You wrote grease and oil interceptors. If they leak, once they get full, they leak out. They go in the creek. So our ditch is going right into Little Forks Creek and into the Welland River. There's a cleanup bill we don't want to see. We don't even want to get near that. So if we have a concrete spillway 5 feet, 6 feet long from the discharge of the pipe to the bottom of the ditch, the guy, I'm hoping that somebody that's cutting the grass will see an oil stain and call us, and we'll get this thing done instead of it going for years without getting pumped out. Because environmentally, we can't afford to build a cleaner. So that was my thought on that for $6,000. And
Yeah, I think personally my own response to that is I think that's a great idea because it's looking after environmental issues and we don't need any problems in that respect. It will just go back and to number 2 there, the bid allowances. I'm sure council would, if there's any discussion on that one, I should have caught that sooner, but is there any questions to Mr. Ramondo on item number 2 and 3? Councillor Cridland.
Through you, I'm going to come back to those, not from if they're present or not, but just from a dollar amount, but that's later. Okay, so I don't have to.
Don't want to speak to it now?
No, I think going through this process and just speaking to what's here, it's slightly off, but I'll just make a note that it might look like I'm coming back to number 3 a little bit later.
Okay, I'm making a note on that.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll go to no more further questions on the concrete spillway, so we'll go to number 5, the overflow for the fire cistern. Go ahead, Mr. Ramondo.
Yeah, so we've looked at the overflow for the fire cistern. That would be putting in a sort of an overflow pipe that would be tied into the cistern that would allow for basically overflow into the drainage system, right? So that would be basically a $3,000 extra. So generally cisterns are required to be looked after, checked, supervised by staff, but as we know, that may not happen all the time. So I think, again, this is probably a very good suggestion, and we've added this component at a cost of $3,000. I welcome any questions related to that.
Okay, Councillor Van Vliet.
Mr. Ramondo, I have a question. Could we just not put an alarm on it? Would that be less money?
David, did you want to maybe comment on that?
Yeah, if I could.
We can't hear you, David.
Oh, sorry.
David Robbins?
Just a second. I'll try and... Is this any better?
You're very quiet, sir.
Oh, sorry. Is this any better?
Yes, that's better.
Very good. The firefighting cistern is essentially the cistern that the fire trucks will fill up with and depart to fight fires. We are charging that cistern with roof drainage. And so if the department kept the cistern fully charged for the event of fire, and then we had a large deluge of rain, we could easily exceed the capacity of the cistern. So an alarm really wouldn't help at perhaps 2 in the morning during the deluge of rain. It's easier just to have the overflow like you have on your bathtub, and then it just goes to the creek at the back of the property.
And David, the overflow is basically a mechanical component. It's like a discharge pipe that...
It's just a discharge pipe at the top of the cistern, so when it reaches or exceeds its maximum capacity, it starts flowing out the pipe and would drain through the back creek drainage. such as it would if the roof was simply discharging to grade.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from any councillors? Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to David or Mr. Ramondo. What do you propose? Sorry, what do you propose to drain it with as far as diameter? And it seems to me that it would only be 100 feet. I'm struggling with the math.
It would be 100 feet of trenched piping. I don't have the exact diameter on me right now, but it would be a trenched and buried pipe as the cistern itself is buried. So it would have to be a trenched backfill.
Likely a
pipe
permeable stone.
Connected to the cistern.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gilmore, any follow-up?
And we would, just adding to that, that would all be engineered. So part of the evaluation would include the analysis and what might be adequate in terms of the pipe diameter size and the size of the trench drain. And it would almost act like call it a French drain. So again, that's not a bad idea. If we were to have a torrential rainstorm, and the tanks were at capacity, it would surcharge the roof drainage, and you probably have water remaining on the roof.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the cistern? Okay, seeing none. Moving on to item number 6, alternates for domestic water cistern. I see no costs there.
What we did there to introduce more competitive bidding is we had included a number of other suppliers. So we're hoping that would create a more competitive bidding environment and potentially lead to some cost savings. We haven't placed a number on that, but I think the mere action of adding additional suppliers would introduce a more competitive environment for those domestic water cistern.
Okay, questions? Seeing none. Move on to item 7. I think, Councillor McClellan, that was your suggestion, was it, on the 5? Okay, any thoughts on that you'd like to put out there? Or?
So I know, through you, Mr. Mayor, at Lakewood Camp, we had asked for that. I know at Jericho House, they have 4 to meet their firefighting. The Caston place should be way more money. They had $120,000 in there. I believe that's probably close to it. I went to a local supplier. The prices he quoted me for 45,000 gallons would be under 50 grand. If we go, it'd be under 60 to go to 55,000 gallons. So
Okay.
it just makes sense.
Thank you. Mr. Ramondo, your comments on that, please?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that was a very good comment from Councilor Cullen. What we did is we figured we'd realize perhaps a cost savings of close to 60,000. However, we nudged it back a little bit to accommodate the excavation and placement of the cistern within the ground, backfilling, and probably a little bit of insulation on the peripheral. So from a $60,000 savings, we've brought that down to 45. Again, we might be receiving more competitive bids, and the number would be considerably higher, perhaps. But this is a starting point that we felt comfortable with.
Okay. Any other questions from any councillors on that? Okay, that's a good suggestion. Move to number 8. Architectural altar generator slab to include a retention pan for potential oil spill.
Yeah. So another good suggestion from Councillor McClellan, kind of stewardship and environmentally conscious. With generators from time to time, when they need to be refilled with fuel and maintained and serviced, and there's likely lubricants involved, so there could be some potential for spillage. So the intent was to create a slab below the generator that again could trap or provide signs of spillage so it can be easily cleaned. So that was sort of the intent there with that slab. That would contribute a slight additional cost of roughly $2,000. So again, similar to item 4, where there's a consciousness to be environmentally sensitive.
Okay, thank you. Questions by anyone? Councillor Van Vliet.
Maybe you could answer this, Mr. Morondo. What kind of generator are we looking at? How many kilowatts?
David, do we have is it gas fired or fuel or propane fired?
It's a natural gas generator. So it's not a diesel generator where we'd have diesel spillage, but it would contain oil in the crankcase of the engine, and it would also contain coolant that potentially could spill during a maintenance period.
Okay, my question, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. My question is it about the same as a Generac that a lot of people own, that you just pull the plug out, put a pan under, drain it every 2 years?
Much larger, much larger.
Okay.
We're looking at total station replacement, and it's a large station. I could get the kilowatts that it's generating for you, but it's much larger than a home generator.
Okay, how many?
So it's David, in scale and size, maybe you can describe 5 feet wide.
In scale and size, it's probably about 9 feet long by approximately 5 feet high, by about 3.5 feet wide.
And do we know how often the oil would have to be changed? Because I know in mine it's every 1.5 years or every 2 years.
That I don't know off the top of my head.
I would say there, Councillor Van Vliet, it's probably related to your maintenance contract. I mean, we have Niagara generator. We have a generator at our office as well, a small one, and it's serviced annually. But again, that could be something that could be arranged with your service contractor. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Excuse me. I see the fire chief came on there. Did you have a comment, chief?
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Mayor and all members of council. Yeah, so presently all 4 of our fire stations have backup generators, and we have a service contract with a local generator service. So every year, all of the generators have their oils and fluids changed, and they're load tested annually. So I suspect that this generator would just fit right in with the rest of the service schedule.
Approximately how many kilowatts would the new one be, or what are the ones currently? How many kilowatts are they?
I think
Chief?
10.
I don't have the answer to that in front of me right now. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions regarding the generator? Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor. What's the plan for surface water, rainwater onto this pad? Is it going then, will it pass through the oil interceptor, I assume?
No.
If I could answer that, in researching the possible ways to accomplish the councillor's suggestion, I contacted one of the generator manufacturers, actually the one that we're using in Fort Erie, of a similar station size and likely a similar generator size. They actually have a built-in system for 110% of the fluids in the generator to be captured. It is an extra, $2,000. And we'll add a couple weeks to the ordering time of the generator, but that is likely cheaper than a specially formed slab and a oil grit separator to be piped in and then also maintained. It's essentially a pan within the shell of the generator. So anything falling on the slab would simply roll off like general rainwater, but the fluids that we're trying to capture would go into this pan, which is inside the generator casing.
Okay, so, I mean, Matt, this will be, I'm sure, about a 4, maybe 6-cylinder engine, most likely 4. So maximum oil capacity will be 30 to 40 liters, and coolant will be less. So we're probably talking, in a catastrophic failure, 50 liters of fluid, and only in a catastrophic failure, which, I mean, anything can happen. But so it doesn't really need to be that big, the whole thing. So you're just talking about a tray built into the base that'll hold 100 liters at maximum, I assume then.
Well, the manufacturer builds it, and he builds it at 110% capacity of the fluids within the engine. It's just how they build it.
Yeah.
But it is an option that costs $2,000.
The $2,000 is for this pan that sits under the existing unit. Then is that correct?
Correct.
It is for the optional fluid retention pan that is built into the case of the generator.
Right, I understand. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McLeod?
Just for clarification, there's a concrete pad under this right now. Originally, we thought about trying to catch it, anything that fell on the pad, and take it through the grease trap. It was too far away, and it would have cost more than what David found here. So this is built into the unit, right? The fuel tanks, there's no fuel tank, so, but it's underneath on the stand. It just catches it, and we can drain it. So,
Correct.
Okay, is
Thanks.
there any more comments or questions regarding number 8, the generator slab? Okay, seeing none, moving on. Item 9, Councillor McClellan or Councillor Van Vliet, discussion on that, please, to start.
sure, I'll take that one. So I went down to the new fire hall on Lundy's Lane. Just been built. Everything's there. Nobody's using the key fobs. They've put wedges under the doors. They've taken elastic straps, put them around the handles across the door striker. And I noticed them, and I asked the firefighter that was there, I said, why is this? He says, they're a pain. Nobody uses them. He said, we even to go from the administration side to the engine side, we need to have a key fob to get through because the door is locked and it won't let you go through. He says, so you jump up and there's a fire, you're not looking to grab, they sleep there. So he said, you're not looking to grab your key fob and run. He said, we don't use them. It's a waste of money. So that, having gone through there, I said, why are we spending this kind of money for this?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Raimondo, any comments?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to, how the fire station will operate, right? Certainly response times are critical. Key fobs are handy in essence. In essence, it's kind of ironic. When we undertake, building design and building construction, the first thing we're asked to do or ask our clients to do is never lodge your doors open, right? Especially perhaps between the apparatus space and which requires a fire separation and alternative spaces. So maybe the option is, don't provide locks on any doors, the self-closers, and where you do need security, revert back to keys or push buttons if you're entering from the exterior. So if you're responding and staff are responding to the station and need to get into the apparatus space or bunker gear area that they can punch a code in that can be memorized versus a key or a fob. So there's no real, the key fob is newer technology, replaces keys, but again, I would leave that up to how the station is preferred to be operated and what the preferences are of staff and volunteers. So again, on that basis, then I would certainly consider, taking the $14,000 credit thereabouts and going back to a key system. And we can further, I guess, when we analyze it a little closer, we can look at the hardware schedule and door schedule and see what essentially really needs a lock and key, and what might be better off just with a closer and maybe a push. So the doors are literally pushed or pulled open, and with a closure on some of the key areas, and not have them latch, perhaps, right? So those are things that we can further look at.
Okay, thank you. And I'd be very interested to hear from the chief on this. Any comments in regards to this change, potential change?
Yeah. So just so council's aware, in 2021, council approved a capital project to update all of the fire halls to a standard key fob system when we updated the alarm system to match the rest of the township facilities, including town hall, public works, the arena, the community center, and all 4 fire stations. The key fobs, as opposed to keys, it used to be that back in the day, the firefighters were issued keys or a code. We had a single code pad. And the downfall to that is when a firefighter retired or left, we were either left with having to change the code for everybody or changing the locks, because getting the keys back, I mean, everybody had them. The benefit to the fob is we're able to control the fob remotely. We're able to add an individual fob to the system or remove it to the system. We can determine what doors that fob enters or what's it's able to open. And additionally, any of the doors that are controlled by the fob system, we have access to remotely open and close them. So similar to the community center, when we know that we're having a community event, I can go onto the system, I can unlock that door for the public use, and it's on a timer, or I can do a single time. Similar to, if I have a contractor coming to Station 4, I can remotely unlock the door for the contractor without even having to leave my office. That was the intent here. There is a fob on the door going between the admin side and the apparatus bay. But with the system we have, we could leave that unlocked and only lock it when, in the event that we have a public event, an open house, or something like that, and we need to keep public out of those spaces. So that was the intent, is to make sure that this building fits with the rest of the township facilities and with the upgrades that we just did to the rest of our facilities.
Okay, thank you. Comments or questions from councillors? Councillor McClellan?
I have no problem with the exterior doors having a key fob. The building I was in, all the interior doors had it, except for the washrooms. The firefighters that were there told me, we just built wedges, we got pieces of rubber hosing, it's driving us crazy. We're living here, and we're working here, and it doesn't work. Outside doors, I have no problem. Give them one to every firefighter we got. You can turn them on, turn them off. If we can't trust the guys we let in there to save our lives, why do we have them working for us?
Okay, thank you. So my point, I would agree with that. I mean, every other fire hall has the fob system. Every other, township building has it. We don't want a new fire building to be inconsistent all of a sudden with everything else. So it makes a lot of sense for the outside doors. I could see the frustration of having to deal with inside doors, having to fob your way around the building all the time would drive me crazy too. But certainly a fob system to get in, and then it would go from there. So I think we're looking at something in between here. It's not a total removal, but it's a part removal, so which would make more sense. Any other discussion on that? Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, that was my question. What does this figure represent? Fobs on every door in the building?
Mr. Raimondo?
David, how many doors did we have? 9 instances?
I believe there are, I'm going to say 9 or 11, somewhere in there. It's certainly not every door. It is the door from the apparatus bay to the administration area. It is the doors from the apparatus bays to the tools and scuba rooms. When they're responding to a call, sometimes the overhead doors are open when there's nobody at the station. So to keep these areas secured, we have selected to place fobs there, but yes, they could be removed and replaced with keys. If we were to only do exterior doors, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4 doors instead of the 9 to 10 that we currently have. So it would be approximately half that numbered value.
And this, just further to that, is the number seems high, you think, for hardware, but bear in mind, there's the preparation of the hollow metal doors, there's low voltage power that has to be run to the doors, and there's, the actual hardware. So there's a number of processes that are involved that would allow to fit the key fob hardware system and electric strikes on those doors.
So, Mr. Raimondo, if we were to only put the key fobs on the outside door and not have them on the inside doors, not only would we save in the cost of acquiring the key fob system, but now we're not wiring, extra time to wire it in, all that sort of thing as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on that? So it looks like there might be a tendency to want to make a change there.
Yeah.
Councillor Van Vliet.
So guys, I have a quick question. With the key fob, Chief, are you able to see somewhere on your computer system who's coming and who's going?
Yes. Yeah. So we're able to track those fobs when they access the system and when they don't. I will add the intent again between the apparatus bay and the admin side. Remember that we can control those doors individually. So, for the majority of the time, similar to what Niagara Falls is having, they could remain open or in the unlocked state. But in the event we have, say, third-party training, we've got 4 or 5 other fire departments training with us, or we have an open house or a public event, the community hall is used as a vaccine site or an election, a polling station. Obviously, we don't want members of the public to have access to the apparatus bay. For those instances, then it would be locked, and the fob system would be beneficial there. So, I mean, if the intent of council is to remove the interior doors, I would request that at least that one remains, so that way we have full use of the building for both fire and public events.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Okay. Any other discussion on that? So how do we want to, we'll come back to that later in regards to potential changes. Yeah. Okay, moving on then, structural changes, nothing was identified. Number 10. Number 11, removal of radiant slab heating in the admin side of the station with a $45,000 potential savings. Councillor McClellan or Councillor Van Vliet, your discussions on that?
To you, Mr. Mayor, I looked at this building, we have 4 heating systems. Nobody puts 4 heating systems in a building. We're paying for heat pumps to create heat and air conditioning. Why do we need a backup system in the floor? Like, it's $45,000.
Right.
And it's probably more than that, but that's the estimate, so we'll live with that number.
Mr. Raimondo, your comments, please?
Yeah, so I think this is, we had the way this originated is we had the radiant heat within the apparatus space, right? And certainly that's a good thing. We did that at Station 2 in Thorold, and it's helped to conserve undercarriages of the vehicles. So that's a good thing. So given the fact that you already have the cost of a boiler related to the radiant heat, it made sense to extend that system into the office areas. And that would be sort of distributed through a series of heat pumps and additional ductwork. So it is a premium system to begin with. I mean, the radiant heat system is a very good system. I would say it's one of the more premium systems. It's very reliable, very efficient. However, I think this particular recommendation was we would retain the radiant heat within the apparatus floor area, and then the remaining spaces, administrative areas, et cetera, they would go back to a split system. So the intent was then to go with either heat pumps that are wall mounted, we call it a split system. We would further reduce the amount of duct distribution because we can put the split systems on the walls. So that additional savings of roughly $15,000 is attributable to the reduction of some of the duct distribution. So it's not, I mean, it's not necessarily a higher end system, and even the wall mounted split system tends to move air within the space. It's not necessarily focused through duct distribution, but it can work, and it does result in a savings, as noted between items 11 and 12.
Okay, questions? Councillor Cridlin?
Through you, Mayor, I'm going to need a little bit more help just in this whole area. So it might be 11, 12, 13, 14, and I'm not quite sure, which it is I'm speaking about. But just to start with Councillor McClellan's point about there's 4 systems. From sustainability, I'm just going to ask the question then, for the savings of the radiant heat slab, is that going to be something also a little less costly to run operationally? Let's start there.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the radiant heat system, based on our experiences, is very efficient to run. It's probably, and that's sort of the one of its key attributes, right? With that, it's a very efficient system. I mean, there are some pumps that have to be looked after, but the least expensive approach would be to go with some rooftop units. And I think we have some rooftop units as supplemental heating and ventilation in the apparatus space, but you would need that. And then you have your radiant heat, which radiates from the floor slab. And then you have the systems that are in the administrative areas. So although you have, call it 3 or 4 systems that Councillor McClellan alluded to, each system is very specific to the need of the space and the functionality of the space. That's why our team and our consultants made those recommendations. But as noted, there are perhaps more economical systems that would provide some savings, and hence what's been represented in 11 and 12 as potential savings.
Councillor Cridlin, follow up.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Again, it's really just my my wish to have things not dependent or not as dependent on gas as opposed to sort of a heat pump system. So I think Councillor McClellan can probably answer my questions, but we're going in the direction here then where it's less natural gas driven based on the savings that we're getting. Would that be a reasonable conclusion for the savings of 45 and 15?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, it's my understanding that the heat pumps, they work off electricity. I know that for a fact. The radiant heating, and that runs off of natural gas. Okay.
Correct.
So you have a natural gas boiler, and then you have electric pumps pushing the water around in there.
Okay, through you, thank you. That lets me know I'm going in the direction that I want with these numbers then as well. Thank you very much.
Anything further, Councillor Cridlin? No, you're good. Okay, we're back at the radiant slab heat. Any more questions on that? Councillor Gilmore?
Thank you, Mayor. I must admit I'm a bit conflicted with this one because I'm a big fan of radiant in-floor heat. But I guess I'm curious, I'm also not a big fan of 4 systems. So is there any compromise as far as, obviously the administration side needs on-demand air conditioning. Is there any compromise as far as, I realize the in-floor is expensive to put in up front, and then after that, it's good, and coal floors are a nuisance, concrete floors. If they're insulated, they're not so bad. So, yeah, I'm not sure where I'm gonna fall out on this, but, it'd be interesting to find out if there's some compromise as far as the cooling component versus putting additional heating cooling component on that site.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, Mr. Raimondo?
Yeah, it's not uncommon when you have radiant heating systems to introduce some redundancy, right? So say if the heating system went down, that you'd have alternative systems that would provide heating and cooling. So it's not out of the question to provide some redundancy. It's not a bad thing. However, it's not essential either. So that was sort of the approach we've taken. Personally, I would agree with Councillor Gilmore. Like I'm a fan of radiant heat. I have it in my own home, and in my own home, I have a redundant system because I have the forced air heating and cooling as well as radiant heat, and it's very, very efficient to run. But again, that was an approach that we had sort of taken based on perhaps experience. However, there are alternatives as noted, and certainly can be considered here. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor, any more, Councillor Gilmore? Or no, Councillor McClellan, and then I know the Chief wants to, and then come back to you, Councillor Crillon. Councillor Gilmore.
Mr. Mayor,
Or McClellan, sorry.
we have 4 heating systems in this building. It's an unmanned building. There's 2 guys in there 8 hours a day. We have a backup emergency generator. If you go with split systems, only a portion of the building will go out at any time if the heat pump goes. There is no need to spend an extra $60,000 here. It's ludicrous.
Okay, Chief?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. So if council may remember, when we did the needs assessment, the survey, one of the priorities was energy efficiency balanced with cost. I will say that the fire station that I previously was involved in the construction of, we did the entire building with a radiant in-floor. We had a dual zone gas boiler. One zone did the heat for the in-floor and one zone did the domestic hot water. And then in addition to that, on the administrative side, we also used a forced air furnace as our air handler for the AC. Again, it was a redundancy. You're right. We do have a backup generator, and this is our EOC. This is a post-disaster rated building. And having, with a boiler system like this, in the event that the boiler goes down, we have no backup. There is no redundancy to that boiler. So I will say there isn't 4 systems in the building right now. There's 2. There is the primary, which is the radiant floor through the entire building. And then there's the backup, which is the heat pumps. And I would like to add that air source heat pumps are a great system. They do work well. The wall mount units, those split systems do work well. You can zone them. However, as when used for heating, any air temperature, because they're air source, any air temp below -5, they lose their efficiency. So, I mean, if that was the case, we might as well put baseboards in because at least then you're not losing heat outside the building, which you would with a heat pump. So, I mean, that's my comment. That's why it was designed this way, was so that way we had the redundancy and the backup. But same that, you know, that boiler that we have, you know, it's an on-demand tankless system that's dual zone that operates both the heat and domestic water. It's probably one of the most efficient out there. And it's not just because the whole floor has the piping through it doesn't mean that the entire building is heated at the same temperature. That's the benefit to the zones and the circulation pumps, is you can control individual sections of the building independently based on the needs at that time. And it's just a matter of turning on the thermostat, the circulation pumps kick on, and then that room comes up. So it's not like the entire building is heated because of the piping system, the way it's set up. You can control individual zones based on usage.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cridlin, you had another question?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I think there's, I think this is something that the long-term costs that we consider for how we set this up, it might need yet another chunk of a meeting. So I'm, you know, we're making headway in understanding what the long-term range is going to be if we stay with more gas, less gas, more radiant. But for me, this is something that if we can get this right, it'll be much less costly to run. So. I mean, I think I've got lots more information out of it today, and obviously there's some opportunity there still for us. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just adding to that, one of the first fire stations we did for Thorold Station 2 and Thorold South, I mean, we're probably pushing a number of years ago now, 15 years ago, and we were one of the first designs that included for radiant heat. And at the time, Ken Wilkinson's chief building official overseeing facilities in Thorold. And after Station 2 was built, he commented saying it was the most efficient building in Thorold's inventory of facilities in terms of cost and operation. And that we had radiant and floor heating. We had heat pumps that were put out throughout some of the administrative areas. We had the assembly hall. We had a small training hall that was supposed to replace one of the larger facilities by the bridge there. And that had rooftop units because of the extended occupancy. So the occupant load for that hall was close to 200 people. So we had no choice but the rooftop units. But again, we're probably pushing 15, 17 years ago, and to this day, that building's still operating efficiently with radiant heat and boilers, et cetera. So,
Okay, thank you. Councillor McClellan?
Just to correct the chief, you have tube heaters in the apparatus bay, that's system 3, and just for good measure, we had to throw in electric heat in the front vestibule and upstairs in the mezzanine. That's 4 systems, sir.
Okay, thank you. I look at this and I tend to kind of go along with Councillor Gilmore. I have some in-floor heating in my home, and it is fantastic. What I look at, okay, $60,000, is the efficiency over 10 or 20, 30 years easily compensate for that $60,000 initial cost. Secondly, maintenance is always an issue. Those ceiling roof units are always requiring maintenance, and you know, the in-floor would be much less. So I'm just sitting there. I'm a little conflicted as well, but sometimes that $60,000 may pay for itself in efficiency and a better system over a building that we hope to last 75 years. So I think, in my mind, I know where I'm going to fall on that one. Is there any more questions on that? Councillor McCollum?
So, sir, you keep talking about 75 years. The boilers, you'll be lucky if you get 15 years out of them. We'll be replacing kitchens. We'll be replacing bathrooms. Every system breaks down in 10 to 15 years. So the structure may be there, but it's how much maintenance do you have to do and what do you have to replace. If you get a crack in the floor and these pipes break, how do you fix that? It's ridiculous expensive to go fix that inside the finished portion. In the apparatus bay, sure, you go in with a jackhammer, you break it up, and you fix it.
Of course, over 75 years, there's constant maintenance on all of that stuff. That's a given. Everybody understands that. So, Councillor Van Vliet.
I just want to point out as well, there would be a warranty, so we wouldn't be doing it in the next 2 or 3 years, and in 75 years, we won't be here.
No, but the price of gas is going up.
Understandable, but this is still the most efficient in-floor heating.
You guys, through the mayor, so it's
Oh,
a public
sorry.
conversation, sorry. As
We do that
opposed
a
to
lot,
just-
sorry.
I'm not sure if the
Through you,
public
Mr.
got
Mayor.
that, so.
Radiant in-floor heating is still the most efficient. My father had it in Port Elgin, and we all know what the winter is like up there. And yeah, it works well.
Yeah. Okay, any other discussion on the radiant slab heating? Okay, seeing none, use of the split system in the rooms to eliminate limited ductwork, $15,000. Councillor McClellan or Councillor Van Vliet? Any discussion on that? Points you want to make?
Those together?
Emilio put
It's sort of all
together.
together, yeah.
Oh,
Anything specific to that, though?
No.
Mr. Raimondo?
Again, it would be, Mr. Mayor, through you, Mr. Mayor, it would be a choice, right? If we decide to, delete the radiant heat component within the administrative area, we'd introduce the split systems, and then we'd reduce the amount of ductwork. If we retain the radiant heat, there could be a middle ground. There could be an opportunity to reevaluate this, retain some of the radiant heat, but reduce the amount of ductwork and placement of some of the heat pumps. So there still could be some realization of costs in getting the benefit, perhaps, of both arguments or both approaches. Certainly, this could be looked at further. And commentary related to sort of radiant heat in the apparatus floor. I mean, the apparatus floor is reinforced. It's going to have control joints. The lines are pressurized. The radiant heat lines are designed for that purpose. So if you were to get cracking, they're not going to shear or split. So in our experiences in the last 20 years using radiant heat systems, we've never had a failure of a heating line in the floor, again, unless it was perpetuated by somebody, putting a chisel through it or drilling a hole through the concrete, etc. So they are very reliable systems.
Thank you.
If
Is there anything more, nothing more on that?
through you, Mayor,
Mr. Robbins, go ahead.
if I could address the four systems once more, beating the horse with the stick. To refer to the electric space heater in the vestibule as a heating system for the building is stretching the limits a bit. Most buildings have vestibules, and most of those buildings have small electric heaters in there to quickly maintain a higher heat in that small little area, so that when the vestibule air changes and people enter the building, you don't get a sudden blast of cold air. Secondly, we do have in-floor heat in the building. It was designed that way. We do have the mezzanine storage and mechanical rooms on a mezzanine level. They do have electric heaters up there simply because for the minor amount of heat that those will take, it was just a more economical way of doing things. Sometimes having a number of systems is more economical than just one blanket system that does everything.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to number 13, installation of water filter UV light system for the domestic water cistern. Anybody, Councillor Van Vliet or Councillor McClellan, discussion on that to introduce it?
So my thoughts on that were, through you, Mr. Mayor, my thoughts on that was it's an unmanned fire hall. If it happens to go 10 days or 15 days or 30 days with the same tank of water in it, there could be something in it. A UV light is not inexpensive. The number here seems pretty expensive, but I know they're generally not that expensive.
Okay, Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor. My point exactly. Where did $7,500 come from? I mean, you can do it in a house for $1,000, so two people are going to be here. Like, we're treating water for...
Thousands a lot too. I think they're like $500.
Treating water for sinks, I suppose, hand washing.
Yeah.
Certainly, hopefully not for the toilets, but who knows? Yeah. I mean, if you put the thing in, everything comes out of the cistern is going to pass through it, which is fine. I'm astounded that it's $7,500.
Mr. Raimondo, could you speak to that, please?
Now, bear in mind your capacity and your demands are going to be much greater than I suspect your standard residential home. So those are numbers that we had got through our consultants based on the capacity requirements and demand requirements. Certainly that could be reviewed and reassessed, but from a budgetary perspective, these were numbers that were revealed to us through our consultants.
Okay, thank you. So the purchase of one of those devices are $500-600 for residential purposes. Would this also include independent contractor having to come in and install that separately from the regular plumber? Is that where some of the cost, where this number's coming from? Do we know?
Likely, through you, Mr. Mayor, likely they're highly specialized systems. When they're specified, they would generally be provided under, call it the plumbing contractor, the mechanical contractor. He would then sub it out to somebody like perhaps Culligan or whomever, and they would provide a number, then they would mark it up, then they would coordinate. Again, we're following recommendations based on supply demands. You've got, I guess we could isolate it and say perhaps some of the hose bibs that might be tied into the domestic water are isolated so they don't get the UV requirements, although that doesn't say somebody wouldn't necessarily be drinking from a hose bib. Like we haven't, and correct me, David, if I'm wrong, we didn't take the time to isolate, say, all domestic water from any potential gray water, correct?
Anything in that domestic cistern is essentially used for washing the trucks on the inside of the building, bathrooms, kitchens, even the exterior hose bibs, simply because duplicating plumbing systems is a little more expensive than getting a filtration and purification system that would do the entire.
The thing with this is, if I may, there's only one place that it needs to be going, and that's where water is consumed by people. All that other water, we don't need an industrial system to wash the trucks and do all that. The only place that needs to have a UV system is where people are going to be consuming water, which would be basically, I'm guessing, the kitchen, which would easily be served by an inline system that you buy at the hardware store. I have one of those systems. It serves my whole house, and capacity is fine, and they're like $500-600. So I can't see putting in a larger, more commercial system independently by an independent contractor at that much more cost to clean water, to wash trucks and spray down the driveway and that sort of thing. So I would urge you to take a look at that, and in my opinion anyway, unless there's other thoughts on it, we just need it for the drinking water area. So, and they're not that expensive. Councillor McClellan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm thinking the same thing you're saying. Maybe, I understand if you split the plumbing system up, it's going to add tens of thousands of dollars to the bill. But if we put one under the sinks, or have one that goes into both of the washrooms, or all three of the washrooms, one covers 3 washrooms, that's probably, the feed line coming in from your system, your pump, goes through there, that line feeds 3 bathrooms and shower heads, and that's covered, and there's one there, and there's one in the kitchen. And so you buy 2 systems, and they'd be the same as what you would need in your house to do that.
Yeah, like the system in my house, it's like $600 and a new UV light once a year for $120, and that's it.
Yeah.
And it does my whole house. So again, we don't need to clean water for washing trucks and that sort of thing. So that's something we could look at for sure. Any other discussion on that? Okay, boiler system to heat pumps for supply of heat to Radiant. That we kind of covered that off already.
Yeah.
Number 15, look at instant hot water heaters or heat pumps instead of boilers for domestic hot water.
That was kind of covered.
That was
as well.
That's all part of the heating system there in the hot water. Remove 2 of 4 exterior hose bibs. 4 was felt to be unnecessary. Discussion? Councillor McClellan?
We're coming off a cistern, It's a 5,000 gallon cistern. Are we gonna start watering the flowers and the grass and everything around the place? You'll be, maybe if they came off of the fire pump cistern that's collecting roof water, that's fine for that, but it just seems like a waste.
Okay. Mr. Raimondo?
I would agree. What we did through you, Mr. Mayor, is we looked at the remaining 2 hose bibs and we kind of strategically located them so they're available through the peripheral of the building should water be required. So we see no harm in having deleted 2 of the exterior hose bibs.
Okay, thank you.
So if I can.
Any other discussion? Councillor McClellan?
It wasn't about the cost of the hose bibs, it was wasting water out of a cistern where we're buying water for.
Yeah, because it's just $1,000. And I shouldn't say just. $1,000 is lots of money.
Yeah, no, it was the $200 every time you fill the tank and
Right.
somebody leaves the water running there.
That's true. Okay, moving on, item 17, tank for laundry extractor effluent stemming from concerns of septic bed contamination. And that's an additional cost of $15,000. Councillor McClellan, would you speak to that,
Yeah, so
please?
that was on me again. It's, we're told that, and when they come back from the fires, there's carcinogens, there's everything else in the bunker gear. If we let this go out and it goes into the septic doesn't scrub out carcinogens, it doesn't scrub out chemicals, it just takes out organic solids. So they're all gonna run into the Little Forks Creek and again into the Welland River. I've done enough environmental cleanups to know that we don't want to have to do that. So that was my thought on that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Raimondo, comments?
Yeah, I mean, there's, through you, Mr. Mayor and Council, there's certainly a concern there from Councillor McClellan, and it's a valid concern. We did reach out to the detergent manufacturers, and I believe we did get some confirmation that would indicate that the detergents used in the cleaning of bunker gear through the washer operator, in fact, are biodegradable. And with that, they would, when put into the septic field, they would degrade any of the nitrates or contaminants that may be on the bunker gear that is being cleaned. However, that isn't completely substantiated, so I suspect this requirement is certainly valid, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion or questions from any of the councillors? Councillor Van Vliet.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I have a problem with this if the tank is going to be stored inside. Is that what we were looking at? David, was that, we talked about it being stored inside.
Yeah.
We originally were looking at storing it underground. Simply because it's easier for the extractors to flow there. Much like your home laundry equipment, there isn't really enough pumping in the machine to pump it uphill and into a tank. So we were going to essentially bury a tank that could be periodically drained. There are tanks with seals on them if you're worried about air contamination, used for grease traps in kitchens and such. So we could do it that way, if that's kind of what you're getting at. To bury it outside would be a longer length of pipe, plus a deeper tank, and to not bury it outside, I don't think plays into Mr. Councillor McClellan's idea of the tank, such that it could be closely monitored for flow.
And at other fire stations, where is their tank located?
I believe the one currently at City Hall or adjacent to City Hall, it flows into your septic bed without a tank.
City Hall where, David?
Like here?
Your main station.
Sorry?
Your main station?
Oh, here.
At
Okay, Chief, could you chime in on that, please?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. So I will say that we have two front load washers, one at Station 3 in Burnaby and Station 4 in Wellandport. We currently use the detergent now. However, these units are not considered as actual bunker gear extractors for laundry, and they do discharge to the septics or now holding tanks. As we did not replace the septics, as you recall, last year. That was a capital project that was, instead of doing septics, staff was directed to put in holding tanks instead. I will say I contacted the manufacturer of the detergent directly. There's actually two of them. One's in Kitchener, Ontario. The other one's in Texas. And both of them, their detergents are considered biodegradable and septic safe, and have thousands of fire departments across North America that use these detergents with septics with no issues. And in fact, we were provided a letter of certificate to say just that. I will say that the carcinogens that Councillor McClellan speaks of, yes, it's all regarding the soot and the off gassing that comes, or not necessarily, I want to say contaminants, but the soot that's in the smoke that our gear absorbs. Very similar, our skin absorbs those same things. On the fire scene, we do a gross decon. We hose each other down. We have brushes and soaps, and we try to get as much of the dirt and soot and coal and ash off our gear before we come back. And then we have to separate the gear. We have our outer shell and then our internal liner. They get separated and washed separately. And it's my understanding that these detergents, what they do is they emulsify, they encapsulate and emulsify, and then break down those carcinogens, so that way it removes it from the gear completely. I would like to say that the way the extractors work is the NFPA 1851 is very particular on how bunker gear is cleaned. And unlike a residential where it's a simple, the water goes in, detergent goes in, fabric softener, it's a spin cycle, and there's set water temperatures, there's set spin cycles, there's a pre-wash that's required, a standard wash, and then 3 rinse cycles. So when all that's said, I mean, it would be easy to consider that any tank that we would install could potentially be filled quickly. You figure, we run, 12 to 15 fires a year. The average call, we require 20 sets to be cleaned. The extractors will only do 4 sets at a time. So, I mean, certainly the tank, we could put the tank in. My suggestion, if we were to do that, would be to bury it out back the hall, and then we would have to get it pumped accordingly. But when we're talking about costs and the risk to the environment, there's insufficient evidence to me to justify the cost based on the information that's been provided to me by the manufacturers of the detergent.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Van Vliet, carry on.
So to bury the tank into the ground would be the same as the rest of us. When our washing machine flows, mine flows out into my septic. There's no pumping out. So if we put it in the building, then you have to have a pump to pump the water from the extractor into the tank, then have a truck come in and pump that tank back out. Right, so we're pumping twice. Pumping up and out, and pumping out through the truck, correct?
So it's no different than you have to have.
Just
I'm going this way.
Councillor Van Vliet.
Is that correct, David?
The way it would potentially run is that the extractors would flow into a sump pit, and then if the tank, the large storage tank, was above grade, the extractors would flow into a sump pit, and then that would be pumped into the storage tank.
Okay, so can I ask you just a quick question, David? So in your professional opinion, is it better to have it buried and more cost efficient, to have everything flow down and then just have the truck pump it out when it comes?
There are many buried tanks. Some leak, some don't. We would hopefully specify a tank that did not leak. And there are monitoring systems such that you can monitor the tank that it's 75% full, 90% full. Big red lights flash when it gets 95% full. And then you can either shut off your extractor or have somebody come and pump it out. There is less space used if it simply flows into an underground tank without the sump, and space, since the removal of the barn is a pretty high, is something that's quite in demand in the station.
Go ahead, David.
Um,
And Councillor, just adding to David's comments there, is that certainly gravity flow is more economical because you'd have less mechanical requirements, i.e. pumps, etc. However, the intent, if we're flowing gravity, we'd have to likely look at the tank being close by, maybe along the building peripheral. So because your invert level, meaning the flow to the top portion of the tank, would, to facilitate flow would be a requirement in terms of making it work appropriately. By having it closer, it means you can put the tank at a lessened depth. So the further you put the tank away, the greater flow, the greater percentage you'd need in the pipe and fall. The deeper the tank, the more expensive to install the tank. So the best approach would be, if possible, they make some reinforced fiberglass tanks. Again, I know they make some catch basin manholes that could be used potentially, but again, we'd have to size the tank to accommodate the capacities that Chief Morgan is indicating, and then store it, and then basically, the company that would come out and pump it out with their trucks. So you'd have, storage tank, related piping, hopefully gravity flow, maybe some high-level alarms to, certainly speak to monitoring the tanks so they don't overflow. So yeah, that would all be worked into the final kind of approach and design should we decide to go with the storage tank approach. Councillor Van Vliet.
Councillor Van Vliet, follow up?
I'm just thinking of space because we've already cut the barn out for storage. I don't think we could lose more space to a tank when it's more feasible to bury it in the ground. Just my opinion.
Okay, thank you. How often would that tank have to be pumped out? Like how big are they? How much, when you're doing your bunker gear, how often are they pumped out?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we'd probably size the tank based on, some of the, perhaps average time, as Chief Morgan noted, in terms of how often they would wash their bunker gear. If they're going to wash 20 at a given time, we look at the volume of water generated by the bunker gear washer and compute that and add likely some contingency for maybe up to 2 or 3 events, perhaps, and that would determine the size of the tank. I don't think it makes sense to undersize the tank and only wash your equipment once, and then you're having to call a pumper in to pump it back out again. So I think that would all be calculated in determining the final size of the storage tank.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McClellan, you had another question?
That was what I was, through you, Mr. Mayor, that's what I was going to say. Chief Morgan just said 12 to 15 fires a year. So it's 12 to 15 times a year you'd have to pump it out. And the cost would be probably what it costs you to pump out your septic tank, because it's the same guy that's going to come and pump it out, take it to the region, and dump it in the sewage treatment plant.
Okay, thank you. That's a fairly additional cost in my mind. Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor. What I need to know is this stuff a biohazard or not? Because I heard you say, I'm talking to the chief now, I guess, that you hose each other down at the scene, which, obviously I understand. And I'm sure you don't capture that water. So what's coming back, you're going to wash. So is the stuff a biohazard? or is it not?
So a biohazard, by definition, it is not. Is it a carcinogenic? Is it toxic to humans through absorption? Yes. So a biohazard, by definition, is human remains, blood, waste, gray matter, that kind of thing. In this particular case, no, it's not a biohazard. It's a toxin.
Okay, and what would the Ministry of Environment, what would their opinion be on whether we discharge it to a septic bed or take it to a treatment plant? What would their opinion be?
So the Ministry of Environment understands that with firefighting, we don't contain fire water. So when we're fighting a fire, depending on what has burnt at the time, but we don't capture or direct or flow water that comes from a fire ground. Quite often there has been incidences across the province where the unfortunate result is groundwater is impacted, and then those events are dealt with on an individual basis. But the intent of a septic is so that way it goes down and it is filtered through the ground, and that's I can't see the Ministry of Environment even having a comment regarding that. Certainly we could reach out and see if they would provide a letter of recommendation. I don't know if they would or not. Like I said, there are thousands of fire departments across North America that use these systems as required. And to my knowledge, this is the only occurrence where the discharge to a septic has ever been questioned. I know I certainly reached out to many of our neighbors and not within the region, because we're the only one that discharges to a septic within the region. Most of the others, minus Cream Street, but they don't have an extractor. They go to Fawn Hill. When I spoke to many of the rural chiefs in Eastern Ontario, they all discharged to their septics, including the fire departments that I was a part of prior to coming here. It's if we wanted to put it into an underground tank and truck it out, there's an additional upfront cost and some additional operating costs. But I'm not opposed to it either way. I don't know if there's sufficient evidence to justify it.
Okay, thank you. Follow up, Councillor Gilmore.
I just want to know whether it's safe to put in the septic system or it isn't. It's got to be one or the other.
The letter that we have received from the detergent manufacturer says that it is.
So one question, Niagara Falls just built a new fire station. What have they done?
Goes into the city stormwater.
Goes into their sewer system.
Yeah. So dilution is the solution.
Yeah.
So,
Councillor McClellan, you had a question.
So I just had to do an environmental cleanup at a place that had a fire. It was all because of the fire that we had to do the cleanup. It was north of $250,000 to do the cleanup. It's the same chemicals, whether they're washing them off them at the bunker gear. Thank God nobody's asking any questions. But we're a town. They are going to come after us and hit us with everything. And our insurance company, call our insurance company and ask them what they think. That's who's going to be the guy that throws the bill at you.
Yeah, good point.
That's where, all I'm trying to do is make sure we're not going to be liable for something 5 years or 10 years down the road, because it is not cheap.
Thank you. Just my own comment on that. I'm kind of with Councillor Gilmore. The very first question is it a hazard or not? The chemical companies that produce the cleaning agents say no. Thousands of fire departments, according to the chief, are okay with not using the collection system. Even in a septic tank, my tank has two tanks and then a pumping system. So even within that system, the particulates and that may fall down below in the first tank and then the second tank. So I'm conflicted as well on that. I'm not sure just where that would fall. So I'd like to find out some more information on that if possible. Perhaps.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that was going to be my suggestion. If this is something that council wishes us to further investigate and report back on. And that actually goes for all the sort of items that are on this list. If there is additional information or details or specifics, staff are, again, available and are very interested in assisting council in making these sort of decisions. And we can certainly make those inquiries of the appropriate ministries, of the agencies that regulate, that sort of thing. So we're here for your direction.
If we can, if we end up not installing this, not only the initial cost of installing it being $15,000 estimated, but I look at the ongoing service cost of that. If it has to be pumped out 10 times a year, that's a lot. $300 and $400 to pump it out every time, so something to consider. Councillor McClellan.
I would recommend that staff call our insurance company, explain this to them. I would question the soap manufacturers that they are saying that their soap is biodegradable and is not environmentally harmful. What it washes, they have no clue what's in that. So they can't tell you that their soap makes everything pure and clean and not toxic.
Of course, your point is taken, but of course we don't know if they haven't done studies in gathering water after it's been washed and doing, analysis. We don't know that. So going to staff to dig into this a little bit more is actually the best way to go. And it's $15,000 installation, and the ongoing maintenance cost of it is something I'm thinking of. So we'll ask staff and with all the points here to come back with another report. So Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor. And the other thing that should come back, I would like to know the cost of sending the gear to a urban center that can discharge it to a sanitary sewer. And just so that we are aware of what the cost would be and how that compares to what easily could be $3,000 or $4,000 a year to pump the tank. So it may offset, and if it does, then we don't have to spend the initial upfront cost. And then, of course, once we find out if the stuff is really hazardous or not, that'll really help.
I'd like to hear from the chief on that suggestion, please, because I don't know how many bunker sets of gear you have, and if it's gone for a number of days, would you have a discussion on that, please?
Right. So I did do that calculation, knowing that this question may come up. So we currently use a third-party service provider for our advanced cleaning that uses this exact detergent as well. The current cost on that is $35 to $40 a set, depending on the cleaning. So based on 20 sets at 12 times a year, that's 240 sets. It's $8,400 just in cleaning. But we also have to pay shipping to get it there, and that's $40 per 4 set for another total of $2,400. So the combined cost just for that cleaning extra would be an additional $11,000, and that's on top of the annual cleanings that we have to do when we do the annual inspections, testing, and maintenance of our gear. Additionally, the turnaround time on those is usually a little over a week. So if we have 20 firefighters that are out of commission or out of service for more than a week, then we have to look at the considerations of providing firefighters with a second set of gear. We know that gear is rated. We have to retire it after 10 years. Most departments issue firefighters with 2 sets, with a primary set being less than 5 years and their secondary set being greater than 5 years. And at 60 firefighters at $2,400 a set, that's an additional $144,000 over 5 years. So $30,000 a year in additional costs if we wanted to use a third-party provider.
Okay, thank you. I think with that information, really we want to come back and do some assessment on the tank to start with. Councillor Gilmore, follow up?
I was just going to say, well, that rules that out. So all I need to know again is whether it's safe to put in the septic system or not.
Yeah. Okay, we've had a good discussion on that one. Any further discussion? Okay, moving on then to number 18, electronic washroom fixtures in the barrier-free washroom, $18,500 savings if we don't do that. Councillor McClellan or Van Vliet, discussion? Have any comment on that? Go ahead, Councillor McClellan.
So again, through you, Mr. Mayor, I went to the brand-new hall. I talked to the firefighters that were in there. The women told me the ladies' toilets flush 4 times while they're sitting on them. We're on a cistern, we're not on city water. The men tell me they have the same problem. They go by, and even walking by them, they go off, or if you're at one and your elbow goes over to the other, the sink comes on. We're on a cistern. Maybe we need that in a handicap unit. I'll give you that. The rest of it, if you can't flush a toilet or a urinal, there's something wrong with you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, this one for me just begs the question, why was it ever put in the first place? So I'd like the answer to that.
Mr. Raimondo.
Interesting. I mean, we're finding today that, believe it or not, these electronic fixtures are actually, they save you water. In terms of commenting on Councillor McClellan's comments about station in Niagara Falls, I suspect, my opinion is they're installed incorrectly and likely malfunctioning, because they shouldn't be going off that often. Regardless, that's not our issue, it's their issue. Certainly in our experiences today with COVID as well, I mean, we're finding in most of the buildings we are designing as a requirement, we're going touchless requirements and fixtures. So, you know, that would be our opinion in terms of why they were put in. But again, I would certainly look at, you know, the opportunity to review them and go to manual flush, other than perhaps the barrier-free universal toilet area. So hopefully that would give you, Councillor Gilmore, the reasoning for their installation.
Okay, thank you. I look to the chief for any comments.
Yeah, I would like to note through you, Mr. Mayor, that the project team, when we met with the architects, as we did bi-weekly prior to this value study, back in June, actually it was right around the schematic design phase, so May, June, we had actually removed all of those electronic controls set for the accessible washroom. And it's my understanding that this was actually a clerical error on the cost consultant that forgot to remove it. They were never included in the system.
Okay, that's enlightening. So just scratch that one right off. It was never supposed to be there in the first place. It's already been removed. Okay, no further discussion required. Moving on to electrical, number 19, redesign from central control light occupancy sensor to a localized system. It's not a code issue. Any comments or discussions from either of the councillors over here, McClellan or Van Vliet?
So this was, again, myself, the one after this. Again, I looked at the switches. They're $300 switches, I think the light switches were. There's another sensor that was in the room that was another astronomical amount of money in every room. The officers' offices had glass in the new one in Niagara Falls. As I walked down the hallway, they could sense my shadow or movement through the glass. They were all turning on. So not only were the hallway lights on, every office I walked past, the lights came on. I mean, again, if you can't turn on a light switch or get something that works right, we don't need to spend $500 or $450 per room on sensors and light switches.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Raimondo, any comments?
Yeah, I would agree. I think in some cases, you know, we would look at providing occupancy sensors in washrooms, so lights aren't left on an extended period of time, although sometimes their placement could be challenging because they're on a timer. They'll time out and the lights will go out while you're in a water closet potentially. But certainly, again, I'd say the location of these sensors are critical. And I can't speak to the Niagara Falls Fire Station. However, I would suspect they're probably not located in ideal locations that would not facilitate them turning on when you're walking down a hallway. However, I think this cost savings is certainly worth looking at. And we can certainly look at perhaps spaces such as the washrooms where maybe they're left on, but we can go with a Lutron system that's built into the switch and save some further funds. So I think this is a good credit.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion from any councillors on this point? Councillor Van Vliet?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Raimondo. During our meeting, did you not tell us that the sensors are required now, building code? It was either you or David, I can't remember.
David, you want to comment on that?
As part of the last building code review and publication, they have included energy efficiency requirements and light sensors in certain areas are a requirement as part of the building code now. The system that was originally designed had essentially all the lights, I believe, functioning on an occupancy sensor, so that when somebody's in the room, the lights go on, somebody leaves the room, the lights go off. That's how it's supposed to work. I can't speak to the fault of the Niagara Falls station. We had no involvement with that station. We could essentially change the sensor system from one where all the sensors feed back to essentially a central brain, and just put sensors on the individual rooms that would most likely benefit from it, and go with that. And I believe that's what is reflected in that $4,000 savings. There would still be sensors in the building as the part of the building code, but it would just not be everywhere. It would be a more localized system.
Okay, thank you. You're a little bit muffled there, but I think the point was, as long as it's meeting building code where it needs to be, that has to be done, and the others would be standard, good old-fashioned light switches and that sort of thing. Chief, comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to highlight why these were included. So there's two kind of guiding principles that got us to these. One was when we conducted the survey, both with the council and the firefighters, energy efficiency was highlighted as one of the priorities that we had to address. And then the second piece, in 2015-2016, council had commissioned a building assessment study completed of all of our existing facilities. And the recommendations out of that engineer's report was that as we work through our buildings, that we upgrade to energy efficient lighting, as well as automation and controls. And those are things that we have been working to undertake as we go through these buildings, both of which, I mean, council just approved this year, which we conducted at both stations 3 and 4, where we installed occupancy sensors and switches. When we did the new lighting there. So that was the idea and the intent when we included this in the scope of the project here, because that was council's previous direction for energy efficiency, and we were following the recommendations of that engineer's report. So certainly, I mean, if this current council decides, that it's an upfront cost savings, we can go down that path, but that's why it was included in the original scope.
Just one other question through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Chief Morgan. In the instance where you're responding to an alarm and you have volunteers showing up and getting ready to depart, presuming all the light fixtures would be then left on for an extended period of time while they're responding to an alarm versus potentially shutting off and saving energy.
That's correct. Yeah, so when we respond to an emergency, we run into the hall, we flick the lights on, we get in our gear, we jump on the trucks and we leave. So no one's waiting for the trucks to leave and the door to close to shut the lights off before we respond. So these automation controls would certainly correct a lot of that.
Okay, thank you. That's a good point, Mr. Raimondo. Councillor McClellan.
Chief, you can, through you, Mr. Mayor, you can buy motion sensors to fit on wherever the switch is for this room. It'll turn on when we're here, it'll leave when we're gone, for $35. We don't have to tie it into a computer to run the thing. Now we're married to that company, and they charge us whatever they want for maintenance every time we have to do it. Instead, we can call one of the electricians to change a $35 switch, or 2 or 3 of them if that's what's required. This is, the whole world doesn't have to be automated to save energy. You just got to use your brain and some common sense.
The other thing too that I look at here, the cost of the system and maintaining it, even leaving, to Mr. Raimondo's point, even leaving the lights on for a few hours. Lights are so efficient today with such low wattage consumption, you know, and I'm sure our new fire hall will be installed with all very high efficiency light bulbs. So it's not like it's costing us, you know, thousands of watts of power for a few hours. It's they're very efficient today. So even if we go that route, it's not that expensive. So, Councillor Cridland.
Mayor, yes, we've got LED lighting throughout the station.
Yeah, and I know I have quite a bit of that at home, and you know, they're 5-watt light bulbs, and you know, they for a whole year they can run it, you know, every hour, every day for a whole year for $3 or $4. So, you know, it's very, very efficient lighting. So, Councillor Cridland, you had a question.
Thank you. We're just about done for this page, so that was fantastic. So just to lighten it up, just no pun intended. Anybody driving by that sees a light on in that fire hall will call me if it's on. So we'll know if there's a light left on, I'm sure, in Wainfleet.
Okay, thank you.
I could.
Anything else on the lights? Then we'll go to number 20, and then we'll take a short 5-minute recess after number 20. So item 20, carefully coordinated sensor placement. $0. I don't know if that's anything.
We just discussed it.
So.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, just I think 19 and 20 would be closely knit together. We would agree with Councillor McClellan. Certainly occupancy sensors, motion sensors would likely be the way to go here, and certainly take the credit, and there could be potentially greater credits once we further analyze you know, installation of light sensors and motion sensors throughout. So I think this direction is a good direction.
Okay, thank you.
Through you,
Councillor McClellan.
So I just want to make one comment. I know I mentioned the Niagara Falls Fire Hall that I went through. I just want to mention that I know Raimondo and Associates didn't build that or design it. In no way was it a slander to you. It was just the newest fire hall I could get in, and that's what I went through to look at, guys.
Okay, noted. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute recess and reconvene in 5 minutes. Okay, we're back in session. So we've gone through the 20 points here that are cost savings, and we're at the point now where, is there any input from any staff members, finance, anything like that, that having heard all this, is there anyone that's, any comments at all? Other than the chief, because the chief has been commenting as we go, but.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. And again, I guess at this stage, from a staff perspective, you now have had sort of a report from the councillors and the architects that has been prepared independent of the sort of internal project team that sort of has been involved in the development of the project to date. And I guess at this stage, there's a fairly significant report that was originally prepared and presented to you as a council at your meeting on September 14th, which was deferred pending this action to happen. So I think the sort of next steps are for us to return with that deferred report. But you have provided some indications that some of these items on this page that is before you this evening that you've just run through, some indications that some of these would be nice to incorporate into that original plan. Some of these that you may need additional information about before you make a final decision on. So ideally, what I think from a staff perspective we'd like to see is some direction from you as a council with respect to these items. And again, you've already done a very detailed step-by-step analysis of the 20 items. But are there ones that you would like us to further investigate, report on, ones that we should incorporate directly into that sort of deferred report with an alternative? Is there additional information on any of these specific items that you'd like to see before you? I see the chief has just popped on the screen and might want to add to that just to assist him, as he's probably going to be one of the staff members that's doing a lot of the legwork on this for clarity purposes. But I guess that's my sort of request of council, that you provide us the direction that you'd like on these 20 items, and perhaps I get the chief just to comment beyond that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through the to CAO for bringing me on. One of the things that I didn't get a chance to comment on earlier was regarding the fire cisterns versus cast in place. And I know that number of $45,000 savings, that seems like a big number, but one of the things that 45,000 didn't account for, or the fire cistern didn't account for, was the installation of the electric pump that was to go into those cisterns. When I contacted two suppliers for these cast or for the precast, and the cost per tank was $13,000 for each, and that's not including installation. So 5 of them alone is $68,000, and that didn't include fire department connections. That didn't include the plumbing or the piping to connect them together. Obviously, the excavation is going to be the same as a cast in place. So when all of that was said and done, the savings that is seen there is not $45,000. In fact, it's almost the same as a cast in place. And the difference with a cast in place is we have a local contractor who does them. The quote that we received was for $70,000 inclusive, all in, excavation, concrete, labor, the whole deal. And that extra funds was to go to the installed fire pump, and then any additional escalation from the installation of that pump or that cistern that happened last year. The last option was for 2 tanks at $25,000 each. And when I contacted that supplier, they said that those were $43,000 each, including shipping, but that did not include installation or crane costs to lift those into place. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I wanted council to be aware that number of $45,000 savings to move to precast is a clerical issue there because it forgot the fire pumps that were to be installed.
Okay, thank you. I have some questions, but anybody else? Councillor Gilmore?
Yeah, so the big tank has one pump, and are you suggesting that we have to put 5 pumps in each of the small tanks?
No, there would still be one tank or one pump in the one tank that's closest to the drive. But the installation of 5 tanks, because you have to core the bottom, you've got to core the top, so that way they can equalize and vent. There's still one pump, but the what I'm saying is the cost of the tanks themselves versus a cast in place are almost the same. So that $45,000 was because there was a pump. The pump wasn't included in the price, and the estimate that we received on that pump was approximately $30,000.
Councillor Gilmore, follow up?
No, I'm baffled.
Councillor McClellan?
So the 5 tanks, the manufacturer would put the size of pipe we need to fill to them. He'd leave the hole there in the rubber gasket that your pipe goes into. They would be hooked in series to the N1. The N1 would have a pump in it, so they would go down equally.
Yeah.
So there's some plastic pipe that has to go in there, whether it's 6-inch or 8-inch plastic pipe. It's not huge money. But you would have 5 separate tanks. The supplier, you dig the hole and put the bedding down, the stone down, and pack it. The supplier drops the cisterns right in place for you as he brings them in. That's part of the delivery. That's part of your cost. So my biggest question is, what else did we forget? Because there's $30,000 that just fell in on top of the price that we have. One of the things that I did ask Ramondo, and I'm not blaming him because he doesn't have these answers, and he told me that, where are all these costs that are in here that says to be done by staff, to be done by ourselves, to be done by others? I don't know if that's $500 or $500,000 or $2 million. Nowhere anybody has ever told us what that is going to cost. We need to know what all the costs are before we say, sold, let's put this out to tender. Okay. And we're not getting that answer, sir.
Okay, thank you. My question to the chief, was it, you say $13,000 for each tank?
That's correct. The local supplier here, one 11,000 gallon precast tank is $13,000, not including install. Crane time was extra.
Do they need to be 11,000 gallons?
Well,
we got 5.
Right, so they don't make a 10,000. They make an 8.5 or 8,500, and they make an 11,000. They don't make a 10. So, I mean, if we want to hit the 50,000 gallon mark, we would have to either do 6 8,500s or 5 11,000.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilor Gilmore?
How do we get from here, from the pond to here?
So, the pond, there was 2 pieces to that pond. Initially, we wanted to use the pond for fire water as well as storm water. Due to the soil samples when we did the geo, the pond was not big enough for storm. So the water level on this property is already high, and we're very clay. So in order for storm water, for a pond to be used for stormwater management, the pond would have to be massive, and the depth could only be 3. I believe, if I remember correctly, it was 3 feet. I think it was 1.5 meters or something like that. So it was 5 feet, because at this point they weren't relying on meter discharge. They were relying on evaporation to eliminate or to deal with the increased stormwater flow. That depth would not allow for fire water. So we ended up we were trying to accomplish 2 things: stormwater management and firefighting water in one time. But when we had the stormwater engineer, when we had all of that done, it was determined that the pond was not a feasible method of doing that. We had actually talked about doing a fire cistern and a pond separately, but to dig a pond that size with a swale and regrade and all of that was going to be in excess of $66,000, which is why after looking at the ditch on the property that goes to the south of the property, it was actually more economical to extend the Chambers Corner drain, which is actually the next part of this meeting in that memo from the drainage superintendent, to include that drainage program into the project, because it was actually a more economical way of dealing with the stormwater management, specifically the post-development water that would result from any development that happened on site. In addition to all of that, because of the building size, the building code requires that we have on-site fire water. In the event that this building catches fire, the fire department, as a municipality, we have to provide water on site for it. When we went through the size of the tank that was required, it was sized at the time for both the fire hall and the barn, both. Obviously, we could make the tank a little bit smaller because the barn has been removed. But understand that, again, we don't operate a municipal water system. We don't have hydrants. So the intent of this tank as a municipal asset is, in the event that the neighbor 500 yards down the road or 3 kilometers down the road has a fire, we can use the water from that tank for firefighting. And you think of 50,000 gallons, our combined tanker capacity between them is about 5,500. So that's 10 loads for each truck that we can use for community firefighting. So I can update our fire underwriter survey, and we now have a community asset in the centralized area of the municipality that our community now has access to a year-round water source. And that's why that was installed with this project.
Okay, if I can follow up. So I think I heard you say that stormwater is going to be managed by the extension of the Chambers Corners drain.
That's correct.
So stormwater is off the table. So
That's correct.
Now we're back to 50,000 gallons for the firefighting. And
yes.
Okay, now explain to me, I guess again, then if stormwater is off the table, the pond can be deeper than 3 feet because it's not managing stormwater. So why can't it be a pond?
So we, again, looking at the size of the property and what we had available, and knowing the soil conditions, yes, we could dig a much deeper pond. We did have the civil engineer do some studies on that to take into consideration ice that develops, as well as the ability to maintain the level of the pond. They both, if we were to use the surface water from the parking lots, the laybys, as well as the roof water, they determined that there would be insufficient water to maintain that required volume. It was questioned, and we would end up having to line the pond. There was a lot of stuff that was done. We had to make it deeper and wider than what we could do to maintain, to fit in with that area of the property, and still get the volume needed. And ultimately, from a cost perspective, knowing that we have that impounded water there all the time, that we can put a pump in that's maintained, that's clean. There's no maintenance to it because we don't have to clean out the pond. There's no sediment issues. There's no, wild growth or whatever else. I mean, as you can see, that some of the local churches in the area, they dug ponds instead of cisterns, and they are plagued with issues in maintaining them, both in dealing with the growth and also water levels, because there's just insufficient water to keep them full. So that's why the engineers and the project team, that's why we settled on having a tank in lieu of the pond, because it was the best way to make sure that we have a consistent year-round accessible water source.
Okay, Councillor McClellan.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, you started this off that we couldn't dig a pond because the water table was too high and it wouldn't work for stormwater management. So if we dig a deeper pond and the water table is that high, that pond is going to stay full of water all the time, because that's where your water table is. You may get a slight evaporation, and if you say it's 3 feet down, so we slope the banks and we dig it 13 feet deep. We'll always have 10 feet of water in that pond. Something isn't jiving here, what you're telling us. I'm not understanding this at all.
So I've asked these exact questions when we were meeting with the engineers. And again, we're having to line the pond. We're having the ongoing maintenance of sediment and silt and growth. We're still having to install the pump We're having to excavate and ship away or store the excavated soils, but then we're also having to bring in the lining material as well. So those are all costs that ultimately we would lose, a meter of that volume in the wintertime when we have ice freeze. And then there's also the fencing because it was a fire pond. We're also having to install fencing around it. There's access issues. So these were all items that were discussed and considered. And ultimately, it was the civil engineer who recommended to move to a cistern as opposed to a pond. And it was more economical that way.
So if I may, we have 12 to 15 fires. If you empty that tank, then we have to pay for water to come in 12 to 15 times, 50,000 gallons, because obviously in July and August, you're not going to wait for it to rain and fill your tank. So we'll have to have truckers bring in the water. When you look at that over the long run, the pond is the cheaper way to go. And I can tell you, I can tell you from personal experience, I have a pond at my place that's been there for 35 years. And I have a little bit of growth around the outside edges, but it's 10 feet deep. And I don't have growth in the middle. I pull water out of it every single day, and I've never had a problem with it. So something doesn't jive.
So
Okay,
I would like to highlight, if you take a look down Marshville, the new subdivision that's going in there, that's the exact system that was installed there. We went through several options with the developer when determining the fire water in the cistern there, and it's the exact same system. It's the same contractor that we got the price from, and that's why we settled on that. Again, because it's fire water, we don't have to pay to fill it. I've already had, because we had to fill Marshville, we don't pay to fill it. I go to the hydrant in front of B&C, I hook my tanker up to it, no different than if we were responding to a fire, and I would go to the hydrant if needed to at B&C and fill our tankers from there. This is the same thing. The difference is I'm not having to drive the extra 15, 20 minutes during the response because I have the water in the middle of the town.
Okay, Councillor Van Vliet.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just to add my 2 cents. There's a pond on our farm, on our family farm, that has been there for I don't know how many years, but it does run dry because we've watered the cattle. So it does eventually run dry. I just want to put my 2 cents out there. We've had to have water trucked in to fill up that pond to water the cattle. So it can happen.
Okay, thank you. And I know the CAO wanted to make a comment.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, again, I think we've heard both from staff and the sort of investigations that were undertaken. If this is something that council would like some further information on, for example, us bringing something from the engineer or having the engineer speak to it, that is certainly something we can do as well. But again, as part of the sort of review building up to, it seemed that as part of the projects team analysis in conjunction with the architects, it seemed like the appropriate cost appropriate measure to take to move from the original pond design to the cistern design, resulting in a more cost-effective approach from the outset and moving forward in the long term. But again, if that's something that this council would like more information on, again, we're more than happy to present that so that it's in a more formal fashion.
Thank you. Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I was okay not talking about the pond until, an hour and 50 minutes in the meeting, you drop on me that $45,000 savings isn't $45,000. Like, why didn't we know that before we get here? Like, and this is what's bothering Councilor McClellan too, I think. Like, now I don't know if any of the numbers are any good.
So, if I may, Mr. Mayor, again, staff were left out of this independent review, so we didn't have the opportunity to review any of this and ensure that these items were addressed. So I understand your frustration, and I can attest that Mr. Raimondo and David Robbins, they did their best. They've addressed as many items as they can, but these are the things when there's so many things to consider, these things happen. And that's why we have the team we do, because we rely on each other. And when you annex part of that team, this is the result of that.
Okay, so let's move forward here. We have a number of issues here, 20 points. We've had discussion on all 20 points. Some of the points we did not have really too much discussion. Some we had lengthy discussion with changes, obvious changes desired. I'm wondering, do we want to refer this to staff to come back with that additional report on these conditions or on our changes, and it's all been noted, and come back to us at our next meeting with those? And if that's what you want, then we need someone to make a motion to that effect, or what's the next step? To me, that's the next step, because there's all sorts of points. Councillor Van.
I have some points to make, but I just want to move everything forward. Yes, staff was kept out of this, and yes, it was emailed to us on Thursday, but not to staff, just for clarity. It was maybe to Will. I don't think you shared it with anybody. It was Friday. Okay, I'm just saying. I was just saying.
Okay,
I was just saying. All of this that we discussed, that Councillor McCullen and I and Mr. Raimondo and his team discussed, could have been done at our September 14th meeting. There was no errors, there was no omissions. It was just things that need to be looked at. So we could have done this on the 14th. That's just what I want to put out there. There was no real need to have this meeting. This kind of meeting had never been done before with a council in Niagara. I think we're making this a very big process that doesn't need to be such a big process. We just need to move forward and go on. Every time we take a step forward, we take 3 backwards. It's starting to frustrate all of us. We just need to go forward.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just adding to what Councillor Van Vliet noted, what Chief Morgan noted. In our analysis of the tanks, we took it very sort of face value. We're substituting a concrete tank with precast tanks, assuming all the mechanical items, whether it's cast in place requiring a pump or whether it's precast requiring a pump, those were given and likely would be accounted for in either scenario. So at least in my opinion, when we looked at the $45,000 savings, that's directly correlated to the supply of the concrete apparatus, whether it's formed and cast or whether it's purchased as a precast item. So I want to comment on that requirement. Further, I mean, we have a list before us, right? And the next step we would see would be to test the waters. We have estimated costs for each one of these, call it 20 items. They can be worked into the tender documents. We can look at alternatives that break out components. I mean, we could leave the cast in place cistern and work up an alternative price for the precast cistern. And we could make an informed decision once costs come in. So the ultimate solution would be to test the marketplace. I mean, we don't have a crystal ball. We're talking estimated costs here. We're talking a very unique market right now with COVID and supply chain disruptions. Each one of these items can be easily accounted for by putting them in as separate or breakout prices. We get the tender results, and then we make an informed decision by evaluating the prices, whether there are add-ins or cost savings to derive the final, project cost. So that's another way of looking at it in terms of trying to expedite the process. Because ultimately, I think the recommendation or the motion out on the floor was to approve the next step of going to tender, correct? So each one of these requirements can be tested and evaluated through that process. And then ultimately, council will need to make the final decision in approving the project cost, right?
Thank
So
you.
that's another way of looking at it through you, Mr. Mayor.
So the one thing that, and I'm frustrated by this whole process. We have been working in the weeds where we have no right to be. It's not council's business to worry about whether this pond is 3 feet or 8 feet, or that's not our job. Our job is to have staff and the experts give us the proposal, we look at it, we just do a quick assessment, we approve it. We have the money set aside, everything is ready to go. Mark my words, if we keep going down this road that we're on right now of nitpicking all these little points, we are not going to get this fire station built in this term, I assure you. I thought it would have been done by now because this is a very straightforward, simple thing. It's just a fire hall. But because we keep picking away at 10,000 here and 3,000 here, and every time we delay, there's inflationary costs added on, we could have had this fire hall almost finished like today. We could have started it a year ago. And I'm frustrated because we're doing stuff we're not supposed to be doing. This is not our job. Our job is to have the experts give us the proposals. We look at it, a couple of meetings. We don't go touring fire halls. We don't get the diagrams of the fire hall. That's not our job as councillors. Our job is to look after the township's money, do a good thing, approve this, and get it built. I don't know how many people say, I thought you guys were building a fire hall or something. The public doesn't care. They just want it built. They know they talk about it, we're going to build it. But our job, where we get down in the weeds on this stuff here, this whole meeting tonight, to me, is not of any value. Because we're saving 5 here, we're spending 10 here. You're never going to have a perfect fire hall. I'll tell you that right now. Every time you build something, you come back afterwards and go, geez, we could have done this different, we could have done that different. There's fire halls built all the time. These gentlemen, Mr. Raimondo and Mr. Rob, they designed a bunch of fire halls. So why are we beating this to death? In 8-10 months, we're going to be lame duck, and that's it. We're done. So we've just spent, the land, excluding the land, $400,000 or $500,000 of the public's money and have achieved nothing. And we could have had a fire hall by now. I'm very frustrated because this to me is a simple thing. It really is. But because we can't get out of the weeds, because we need to look at every little thing, and it's not our job. And I've talked to other mayors about this, and they said, well, no, you shouldn't be doing that. That's not council's job. Council approves it or whatever. They don't get out doing tours, and we're overworking this, overthinking it. And, Mr. Raimondo, these changes come into play. Your staff has to come in. What would be an estimate on the next step for you to get this ready for us dollar-wise? How much more money would that cost? I can't hear you, sir. You're on mute.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, we've spoken to the consulting team, and we're likely looking at some of these changes, maybe some of the mechanical changes that have been brought out. We would probably need somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 weeks to make any adjustments to the tender package and put it back out for tender. So that would put us sometime mid-November to put it back out, and probably a 2 to 3 week closing. Maybe we can accelerate on a 2-week closing. So potentially, maybe a recommendation can be made just before Christmas. That it takes time. I mean, by going through these processes, you lose a little bit of momentum. The world keeps turning. Their commitments are there, and we'd have to kind of put it back into gear and reassess it, put it back out for tender. But again, without having to go through any additional staff reports, I mean, we could take this list, and it was somewhat fruitful. There were some items that could be taken advantage of, worked into the tender documents. Presume those savings will be there. Where there's some discrepancies or some concern, we can create some breakout prices so we can further analyze the differences in potential cost savings where they've been noted. Some of the items are intrinsically valuable in terms of environmental concerns, and I think we just put them into the document. So I think the process of tendering and how we orchestrate the tender would be fruitful in providing some of the economies that are being sought. But again, just to qualify some of the concerns of Councillor McClellan, that there's a number of things here. There's some pragmatic issues that are important, as well as certainly some economies that need to be looked at. So I think, again, I believe both can be satisfied. I think the motion should be looked at to go to the next step of tendering the project, having faith in the consulting team to orchestrate the tender in a manner that would provide those results. And again, we're not guaranteeing anything because of the current market condition, but I think that would be the real next step.
And just building in this extra cost of going back and redoing everything, I don't want to put you on the spot. Ballpark figure is that it's going to be costing the Wainfleet taxpayer how much more to do this extra process? Just ballpark.
Yeah, I'd say around $10,000. I mean, I think we've gotten a number from Manticon. David, do you remember the number? Was it around 7,500, 6,500 on engineering? Most of it involves, like the lion's share of the work here involves engineering. So it would be the consultant. Our role, I mean, we would have a bit of time, but as a value-added service, Mr. Mayor, members of council, we did not and will not have any intention of charging the municipality for the time spent through the preparation of the report. That's our goodwill gesture to move the project forward.
Thank you. My point being that we've already done this, where we've sought more information here and more information there. Every time we do, it costs us, the taxpayer, this much more money. Last session, I took a leap of faith in we did with the airport, $600,000 without any real information, and we approved that. So what's the difference? Like we had almost no information on that, and we moved forward with it based on the fact that we're trusting the systems are going to work. But on our fire hall, we're bogged right down into every little weed. It's boggling to me. It's mind-boggling. Councillor McClellan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Less than 3 years ago, we went to Brethren in Christ Church, told the people that the previous councils had not taken fiscal responsibility and left us in bad shape. We told them to trust us. We'll spend your money properly. We do not have a city engineer. We didn't send our chief building official. I talked to Mr. Raimondo. Most other municipalities have a group of 6 or 7 that come in that are city engineers, chief planner, chief building official. We didn't have any of that. So it is our responsibility to look at what's happening here. And I take it, when I tell somebody I'm going to do something, I don't tell them that, we raised your taxes 15% in 2 years, but we're going to spend it and we don't care what the price comes in. That's our responsibility. It is. We're a small town. It's our job to look after this. It's our job to make sure this thing doesn't leak contaminants into the water and we get stuck with a $500,000 bill to clean up. That's our job. And if I know about that, I have to make it my job.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Van Vliet.
I would agree with everything you said, Mr. Mayor. We have checks and balances in place. Obviously, they played out tonight. I would also like to make a correction that someone had said this building is not going to be manned. It is going to be manned every day of the week. There's going to be firefighters in there training as well numerous times during the month, so it's not going to sit as an empty shell. I would like to see it get going. I would like to make the motion that we send it out to tender, see what comes back. We are too far into the weeds. We can't keep picking at this. We're all tired of it. We're all frustrated. Every time we find $5,000 or save $10,000, we spend $15,000. Then we spend $10,000 in consultant fees. We're just going round and round and round and round. Sooner or later, we have to get off the roundabout and make a decision. And I would like to make the motion that we send it out to tender and get moving.
Okay, so Councillor Van Vliet has made that motion, so we'll deal with that motion first. Do we have a seconder for that motion? I'm going to second it. Okay, any other discussion? Councillor Cridland?
I'll move to defer that, please, to the next meeting then.
Okay. Right. Do you have a seconder for that? Councillor, I didn't see any hands. Councillor McClellan? Okay. Any other discussion on that? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Gilmore?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm in support of that. It's one more week. I want a week to ponder this, and we'll give you an answer at the next meeting, one way or the other.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Just one more point. As I'm sitting here, I think you can hear my phone and my iPad tinging. Those were people in our community messaging me, making comments that I know I can't comment right now because they're wondering what's going on. So just letting you know, people are wondering why we can't go forward and what is stopping us and what the opposition is. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments before we vote to defer? Okay, all in favor of deferring? Opposed? And that is carried. That motion is deferred. So now we move on to the drainage, or we still have to deal with?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, before moving on, is there any other information that this council would like to see with respect to these items that we've got on the list to supplement any decision you might be making on next week? Again, I'd caution that based on, depending on what you ask for, technically our cutoff for agenda items for the next council meeting was earlier today. So, you know, the ability of staff to prepare a report responsive to your stuff, we'll certainly do what we can, but I don't know how far we'll be able to get in order to get it on the agenda that's published on Friday. But I put that out for you, that staff are still here, available to respond to questions, to try and respond to any sort of requests you make of us, and we'll try to get that information together for you.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on that? Councillor McClellan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, could you send a list of what you have that are the questions that you have to look up for us? Because I'm not sure you wrote everything we think, and rather in the spirit of saving time, just send it out to all of us so we know what.
I'll look to the clerk and ask that for tomorrow, as soon as possible, that we sort of assemble the list of questions that sort of we have noted with respect to the 20 items that were discussed and which ones require further, which we'll be working on assembling further information on.
Okay, we're all good? Excellent. Moving on now to our drainage memorandum regarding Chambers Corner Drain Extension, and we'll look to our drainage superintendent to give us an update.
Great. Thank you, through Mr. Mayor, to all of council. So this memo is just providing an update to the direction that staff received from council at the September 2nd meeting regarding the Chambers Corner Drain Extension. Through the engineering and design of the central fire station, the need for an improved drainage outlet was identified. So under the Drainage Act, we held the site meeting on September 16th with the impacted landowner. Attached to the memo is the report and the plan, which identifies improving the existing ditch, which is about 220 meters long, and formalizing it under the Drainage Act. This would allow for the current facility and any future facility improvements to have that sufficient drainage outlet. The report identifies the physical construction, engineering, and allowances, the costs totaling $13,900 as the estimate. As per the Drainage Act, the consideration meeting will be held November 16th at the General Council meeting. The engineer will be available to discuss the project, and the impacted landowners will be invited as well. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Just put a motion on the floor that Drainage Superintendent's report respecting the Chambers Corner Drain Extension be received as information. Mover seconder, please. Councillor McClellan, Councillor Gilmore, and discussion or questions.
And again, just for council information, by doing this drain extension, we are providing a legal and sufficient outlet to deal with stormwater that would be associated with the fire hall construction project. As such, it would all sort of be, if you will, charged to, I think is the language that I've heard used by members of council, to the project. And the original amounts that were included in the original budget estimate for the project associated with stormwater management would see a savings or credit amount. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on that one? Councillor Cridland?
Thank you. Still recovering from the last part of the meeting, so we'll just go at this a bit slower. But this particular part of the project then, is this something that was planned? So did we run into problems and this is something new, or I think we're seeing savings, so what changed that there were such a savings? So I'm just sort of trying to understand that this is a piece of the project that's now starting to unfold before us. And from a project standpoint, was it planned, and why is it so much under, I guess, is two questions I have. Thank you.
Okay, I think the Chief can start off answering that one. Go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, I can start. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So part of the site plan approval process was receiving comments from the MTO, having a stormwater management plan, and ensuring that all post-development stormwater was captured and distributed in a manner that, as the water that flowed away from the property was no greater than pre-development. So in order to accomplish that, you typically have stormwater management through a pond or like a titration, like an underground, various chambers. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. In this particular case, because of the pond, as we previously discussed, the pond had to be so large for the evaporation. It was incredibly costly and used up too much of the property across the south end. And we ended up having to dig a swale from the west end to tie into it to make everything fit on the property. Knowing that there was a ditch across the back of the property anyways, that flowed into that drain. I had asked the drainage super about how that worked, and any increased outflow would have had to have been addressed in a drainage a report. So that's when we looked at it. We had the engineer do that study, and that's why we found that, in fact, extending the drain was a more economical option than ponds or underground storage or any of the other options for stormwater. And in doing so, addresses all post-development. So in the event that we want to deal with the western portion of the property for training grounds in the future, that drainage ditch is engineered and designed to deal with those post-development flows as well. And it also allows us to make sure that our flows away from the MTO easement as required as part of our site plan.
Thank you. And I'll just look to our drainage superintendent, Mark Jemison, to put his part in as well.
Sure, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. The chief did a fine job of summarizing it there. So we have in close vicinity the existing Chambers Corner drain, which is starts as a tile drain and then flows north underneath Highway 3 up to the Big Forks. So by accessing that municipal drain, we meet the drainage needs of this proposed central fire station facility.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, Councillor Cridland?
Thank you, through you. So thank you for the explanation on, why we're picking the option that we are going for, and that it is obviously more efficient and more appropriate to the land. I want to go back one more step, though, just to understand where we are. The original plan or project number was, I don't have my form in front of me, was X. From a project development standpoint. We've now completed the necessary work and the next level of expertise, and we've come out with a savings in this particular situation. I'm really more interested in why the first number isn't closer to the second number, other than obviously we've got a better product, but why would the original number have been so much different? Thank you.
Okay, can we get an answer there? Or does anybody know, or off the top, or do we need to refer that to staff to find that out?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure if the fire chief can speak to the original drainage, on-site drainage plan, or elaborate any more. Again, there was an allowance that was originally estimated to be required to be paid for on-site surface water drainage. Based on the municipal drain extension, there's significant savings that have been identified. And again, I'm not sure if the chief can build on that, providing the original X amount that was identified for the original works, and then the revised amount. I think we're down around 13.5 or 15, less than 15,000, I believe. But if you have those numbers, you can provide some comment, Chief.
So I guess my question to Councillor Cridland is when you say number X, what numbers are you speaking of when you say that that there's no difference, without knowing which numbers you're referring to?
I'll leave it at that. I should have brought my papers on this part, so my apologies. I'll come back to that later. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so seeing no other questions, the motion is on the floor to receive this report. All in favor? Opposed? None? That's carried. There's no closed meeting. There's no rise in report. So unless there's any further discussion on anything, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. Good spirited discussion tonight.